Once you've looked around the user interface, the first thing you're likely to want to do is to draw something. And since you're used to working in AutoCAD, you probably want to draw that item to scale. It won't be long before you notice that dimension input in Revit is really quite different than it is in AutoCAD. So in this movie, we'll discuss how to input dimensions and how to use units. So I'm in a file here called condo unit, and it's the same file we've been using in the previous movie. So if you've had this file open, you might want to close it without saving and just reopen a fresh copy. You can open any file for this if you don't have access to the exercise files. I'm going to start by drawing a wall, and I'm just going to move my mouse around on screen. And the first thing that you're going to notice here is that there's these dimensions that start to appear as I move my mouse around. You're also going to see these dashed lines at logical locations. So if I'm here, it thinks I want to continue from that existing wall, or if I'm here, this other wall, or possibly even the intersection between the two walls. If I were to click and start my wall at exactly that location, as I start to move away from that point, you're going to see a second indication appear on screen, a small dimension that's labeling the length of the wall that we're about to draw. Now, I'm going to move this slowly, and as you can see, that amount is actually snapping to regular increments, 6-inch increments in this case. Now, that's true if there's no other geometry nearby. But if I were to move in this direction instead, then what would happen is at some point it might decide to snap to some existing geometry instead, and you can see there that I get a very different number that's not at all in a 6-inch increment. So existing geometry usually takes precedence over the snapping behavior, but both are going to be useful to help you rough out the location of this wall. Now, I could certainly just click and indicate the length of the wall that way, or perhaps I want to create this next wall and I want it to be a certain size. Maybe I want it to be exactly 8 feet long. Well, I could come over here until it snaps to 8 feet and I could click, or as long as it's going in the direction that I want, let me just pan slightly here. You can see there that angle is confirming for me that it's 90 degrees, and so I'm happy with that angle. I can just start to type. So if I type in 8 here and press enter, notice that the wall is exactly 8 feet long. Now I'm going to escape out of here, and I'm going to select this wall because I want to show you that the dimension will reappear when the wall is selected. If I select this other wall here, you can see that one's 5'6". This one's 8 feet. So that kind of confirms for me that the length of that wall is in fact what we indicated. Now, as an AutoCAD user, the other thing you may have noticed is that all I typed in was 8. I didn't use any units. If you're using AutoCAD in imperial units, then you're used to the default unit being inches. Well, I'm sorry to say that in Revit, the default unit in imperial is actually feet. Now, the reason I say I'm sorry to say that is because it's going to take a little getting used to make that reversal in your mind. You'll find yourself putting in 8 and thinking it was inches and getting 8 feet, and vice versa. When you wanted feet, you end up getting inches. Well, like anything, it will take a little time to develop a new habit, but it won't really take that long. So stick with it, and you'll find yourself getting comfortable with that new method. Now, the reason I say that is because even though I'm going to show you a dialog where we can go in and we can change the unit settings, unfortunately, there really isn't any way that we can turn on a quote-unquote emulate AutoCAD mode here. So let's take a look at the command in question. I'm going to go over here to the Manage tab, and we actually just witnessed 2 behaviors. And so we go to 2 different locations to see those behaviors. We've got our Snaps command here, and we've got our Project Units command here. Let's go to Project Units, because this is what we're talking about right now, and this behavior of what's the default unit. Now, you've got lots of different categories here, and I'm going to focus on length and click this button right here. And for units, you can see that the default setting is feet with fractional inches. If you open up the list, all of the other choices are single unit choices. So even though it's possible to go to decimal inches or fractional inches, what that would do is it would make all the units inches all the time. So to get 10 feet, for example, you'd actually have to type 120. Now, if you want to work that way, you can, but there is no emulate AutoCAD mode. So if you want both feet and inches, unfortunately, you're going to have to stick with this option and just get used to feet being the default and using a unit symbol when you want inches. So let me cancel out of here, and let's dig a little deeper into how that would work. I'm going to zoom over here, and I'm going to draw another wall and show you what you would want to do here. Now, of course, you can focus on the snapping behavior that we talked about a few moments ago, but as we said, we can type in. So what if I wanted both feet and inches? Maybe I want this wall to be 5 foot 2 inches long. Well, you can type this exactly like AutoCAD. When you want both feet and inches, you can simply type 5, the foot symbol, and then the number 2. Or you can do 2 inches. You don't actually need the inch symbol here because it will be implied. When I press enter, you'll see that wall goes to exactly 5 foot 2 long. I'm going to press escape one time, start drawing another wall. What if I wanted this wall to be 4 foot 5? The alternative is to do 4 space 5. When you do it this way, Revit will see the first number as feet and the second number as inches. And you press enter and you can see that it's exactly 4 foot 5. Let's press escape again. Now, when you want to do just inches, you can either do the inch symbol to make it clear to Revit that this time you mean 10 inches, not 10 feet, or using that same method I just showed you a moment ago, you could do 0 space 6, for example. And now I've got a wall that's exactly 6 inches long. So you can do all the same things we can do in AutoCAD. It's just slightly different, so you're just going to have to get used to what some of those differences are. Now, this will be the hardest the first few days until you get comfortable with it. And then after you get comfortable with it, after a while, it becomes second nature. What about that snapping increment? Well, as we saw, it was snapping to, every 6 inches, for example. Now, it turns out that if you were zoomed out further, you could see that at some point, it would be snapping to every 4 feet, right there. And if we were zoomed in really close, you could see that at some point, it would actually be every inch. If I go back to Manage, click on Snaps, this is where we can configure that behavior. Now, these are just the defaults. You can put in any numbers you like here. So if you don't want 4 feet, you can change that number. If you don't want 6 inches, you can change that number. If you don't want this 1 inch increment, you can delete it. So you can have as many of these increments or as few as you want, and they can be set to anything you want. And it's just going to help you get the rough dimension in first, and then you can come back and modify it later. Now, that's a really important consideration when we're talking about Revit. This wall is 4 foot 5 inches long. Well, what if I realize that it needs to be a different length? Maybe it needs to be 5 feet. Maybe it needs to be 4 feet. These dimensions that appear on screen are not just information. This is actually how we interact with the object after we've created it. Notice there's no command line. There's no place to input these dimensions. So where would you do this? You do it directly on screen right here. So if I select that number, it becomes active, and I can type in a new value, and you'll see the object change. That works to change the length of the wall like I've done here. It also works to change the distance of this wall away from its neighbor, like so. Now, which one moves? In this case, this wall moved closer to this wall. Why didn't this one move closer to that one? Well, it all depends on which one you select first. So always start by selecting the object you want to modify, and then you manipulate your dimension. The word Revit is actually an acronym, which is short for Revise It. So even though at first this method of building objects and modifying objects feels a little strange coming from an AutoCAD perspective, it's built into the core of the program. This is the way that Revit behaves. So the sooner you get comfortable with this method of working, the more successful you'll be using Revit.